Hello, everyone. Welcome for joining. And I see our number of participants is logging in here. So thank you again for joining. We'll get started in just a few moments. We're just making sure everyone can log into Zoom. All right, we've got quite a large number of folks joining us today, so we're just letting everyone's computer system help them log in before we get started. Excellent. Well, we're already approaching almost 200, so I think we'll just at least get started with a few mini intros here. So welcome to all. My name is Karen McGuire. I'm head of division here in the OECD that manages the OECD's local employment and economic development program, and just really pleased to welcome you to our first forum webinar here for 2023. Hope everyone had a pleasant end of the year holidays. Just a couple of quick housekeeping while we get ready here. So first is that don't hesitate to put any elements, if you can, in the chat, just to say, you know, who you are, where you're joining in from. It's always great to have that opportunity to see who's online. Second is that when we get to the question and answer portions, you can use the question and answer function to get your questions in there, and then we'll be pleased to get going. And then also just that today's webinar is recorded, so if you have other friends that were not able to join, then don't hesitate to share this link afterwards. And I see we're already starting here in the chat to let people know where you're all coming from, and it's great to see that as well. So we're pleased to kick off today with really a focus on community wealth building, and it's a topic we think is very inspirational to start off 2023. It's in the spirit of the LEAD program here at the OECD that was created 40 years ago last year, really to identify local innovations, share them with international audiences, and really in the spirit of pushing the frontier so that the OECD really hears what's happening on the ground around all of our OECD countries and beyond. Indeed, this is also in the spirit of LEAD really helping to promote all of these different innovations. And, you know, whether it's been in the past, our work on social economy or inclusive entrepreneurship, you know, just making it aware to the community before these things become mainstream. So right now, this is, we have some really excellent pilots. And today's webinar is going to be structured as an informal conversation. So we'll be zooming in, we'll be going to the United Kingdom, in particular Scotland today, to learn about community wealth building. And we have just around an hour together to have this discussion. And again, don't hesitate to put in your questions in the question and answer box. So if we could maybe go to the next slide, I just wanted to really briefly let you know who's going to be joining us on the virtual screen here. So as I mentioned, I'll be moderating for today. We'll have some seed setting from Liz McKenty, who is chair of the Economic Development Association of Scotland, and is really a partner for today's event. So we're really pleased to have that partnership here today. And of course, we're very honored to have joining us Tom Arthur, Minister for Public Finance, Planning and Community Wealth. And in particular, it's this community wealth part of his title that we're going to be asking him a bit more about today. And Mr. Arthur, I know that you also have a personal passion for music, and we just released a report on culture and creative sectors in Glasgow in Scotland. So happy to share that as well. And then we're also pleased to be joined by Neil McEnroy, who is a community wealth building advisor to the Scottish government. And he's also global lead for the community wealth building practice within the Democracy Collaborative. So really an expert on the topic who's here to, you know, back up in case we go a little bit global in our discussions with the minister, and also has worked as CEO for the Center for Local Economic Strategies for over 2 decades. And I know you've joined us in prior webinars. So really just to get launched right into the discussion, I wanted to first just to give a little background. So we'll just put up a slide here, just because, you know, community wealth building, what are we talking about here? And the minister is going to really tell us how this works in practice in Scotland, but just wanted to flag, it was initially developed by the Democracy Collaborative, this terminology in 2005, and it's really being applied in different places around the world, whether it's Cleveland or Chicago, and even, other places where it's getting started, Somerville, Massachusetts, near Boston, Alameda County in California, near San Francisco, Western Pennsylvania, the United Kingdom, places like Preston, England. But today, we're really looking to see the zoom on Scotland, a place where they've really taken this to another level. So community wealth building, some have described it as a place-based approach to local economic development, which redirects wealth back into the local economy and places control and benefits into the hands of local people. So really interesting as a tool to address structural inequalities, both for communities that maybe are struggling more generally, but also for communities that might be doing well, but maybe are not sharing that prosperity as they should across all residents. So 5 pillars here in the Scottish plan. And so the minister will be telling us a little bit more about this, in particular, issues of inclusive ownership, how we can capitalize spending, how we can support the workforce, how to better take advantage of the value creation of land and property, and how to use finance and ensure that those financial institutions are working for local people, communities, and businesses. So just to put that up there so everyone sees that as a general background. So now I'd like to just pass the floor to Liz, because I think it's really helpful just to hear a little bit from the perspective of the Economic Development Association of Scotland. You have a large association, Liz, over 3,000 members. You have a great strategy, and colleagues can put in the chat a link to your strategic plan with a focus on people, place, and planet. So tell us a little bit why you're interested in this community wealth building approach from the perspective of the association.
Okay, so, well, thanks, Karen. And before I start, I'd just like to say on behalf of EDAS, how delighted we are to be collaborating with you in this event, and in what is, we hope, will be the first of what we hope will be many around themes of common interest. And I'd also like to congratulate LEAD on reaching its 40th anniversary last year, and for the tremendous conference held in Cork, which I attended and which has indeed led to this collaboration. It was great to be there in person. It was great to be mixing. It was great to be hearing from so many who are interested in this theme. And it became clear that there was momentum and something that could be built around this, a further conversation on this. To say a little bit about EDAS before I go into the bit about community wealth building, we are, as you say, we're Scotland's foremost membership association for organisations and individuals who have an interest in economic development. And we aim to improve economic development activity in Scotland by helping to raise the knowledge and skills base of those working and those who are involved in all aspects in this field. And we began this journey over 20 years ago, and our membership has really grown during that time to almost 3,500 people across the country. And over this period, we've established a trusted reputation for delivering high quality events and spaces for dialogue, which attract top academics and experts each year, policy briefings, knowledge sharing, and practitioner-led networks and groups, and university-level CPD courses and learning opportunities to support the needs of Scotland's economic development community. Our vision is to create a country that has a sustainable, prosperous, and inclusive economy, bringing economic and social and environmental well-being to all of its people and communities. And to support this vision, our current strategy, as you said, focuses on 3 interlinked themes: people, place, and planet. We strongly support community wealth building because we believe it connects and strengthens all 3 of these themes. In terms of people, our work here at EDAS focuses on promoting measures that address demographic changes, structural inequality and inclusion, including approaches that promote recovery for people, businesses and sectors affected by the pandemic and, of course, now the cost of living crisis. Our focus on place takes in spatial economic development and what this means for towns, cities and communities in a post-pandemic world, and how to create prosperity and retain this within local areas. And our planet theme, of course, focuses on both the huge challenges and opportunities that the climate crisis and move to net zero brings in terms of research, skills development, jobs and business growth arising from this. Our role is to support our members through events like this one today and to deliver high quality CPD, continuing professional development learning that ensures a sound understanding of the policy and practice landscape. Our members come from all sectors in Scotland, including the private sector and the third sector, or NGOs, as some of this audience might understand better, and academia. But the vast majority of our membership base comes from the public sector, namely local authorities and the main agencies who are supported by the Scottish Government to deliver and support economic development strategy across the country, whether that be in the development of skills and employment, support to businesses and entrepreneurship, research and technology, and or infrastructure investment, is essentially the whole panoply of economic development activity. We've strongly supported the growth of community wealth building in Scotland over the last 4 years, working closely with CLES, the Centre for Local Economic Strategies, and the Scottish Government in bringing learning and development opportunities as well as conversation spaces to our membership base. And we do this because we believe community wealth building has the potential to transform the way that economic development is delivered in this country in creating a well-being economy. And because so many of our members are at the heart of, and indeed as anchor organisations, are completely pivotal in making it happen through utilising the 5 pillars that you've just shared in developing and implementing local and regional strategies and plans. We know in EDAS that community wealth building is a vital component in creating a fairer, stronger and more sustainable Scottish economy. So we've really embraced our role, acting as a bridge and a conduit to sharing learning across our member base and as a champion of community wealth building in Scotland. And we'll continue to do this wherever we can in promoting conversations, including podcasts on our website. And there's one that has just been, I think was put up yesterday with Neil and the Minister, talking about community wealth building. I'd ask everybody to go to our website and look at that now because it's a really good listen. And in supporting events and in promoting the new community wealth building guide that was literally just launched yesterday and again is available on our website, and which was created in collaboration with, clearly with Scottish Government, led by the Scottish Government, but ourselves and the Centre for Local Economic Strategies had a hand, along with a range of people who are involved in our events over the last year or so in creating. So it's a really exciting time, I think, for community wealth building, and to be living in Scotland at this time, despite the challenges that we're facing, because we've got a real commitment, focus and leadership from the Scottish Government, and that's being demonstrated in its vision for community wealth building, and also in its commitment to bring forward legislation through this current parliamentary term. So we're proud to play our part in community wealth building as part of the movement that's taking hold here in Scotland, and to showcase what Scotland is doing to a wider audience across Europe and the rest of the world. And today's event is part of that process. So I'm really looking forward to this morning's conversation and the discussion that follows from this wide-reaching audience. And it really is wide-reaching. I'm seeing some of the people coming in from Australia. My goodness. So we're literally covering the world today. So it's fantastic to be part of this event. And I'll leave it there, I think.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Liz. And yeah, indeed, I see from British Columbia in one time zone all the way over to Sydney, Australia in another time zone, passing even through Africa, Europe, etc. So really quite a diverse group here. I think maybe I could, colleagues, maybe I'll ask Neil a quick question as well. Neil, I mean, you've been really leading up a lot of this work as well internationally and within England and Scotland. Could you maybe give us a little bit of a perspective on what you're seeing in terms of kind of global trends, what you're seeing in terms of pickup around the world before we do a deep dive into Scotland?
Yeah, surely. Good morning, everyone, or good evening, or good afternoon, wherever your time zone you're in. Well, it's quite clear that, you know, from the poly crises we have, you know, economic, social, ecological crises, that many administrations are looking for alternatives of how we actually build an economy that truly works for people, place and planet. And in that, there is a number of administrations that are starting to pick up on community wealth building as a concept, but also a model in practice to rewire our economic system. Its genesis of community wealth building started in Cleveland, Ohio, through my own organisation, Democracy Collaborative, nearly 20 years ago now. Then transferred over to Preston in Lancashire through the Centre for Local Economic Strategies. And now we're seeing pick up in a number of places. It's now been re-imported back into USA, where there's a growing number of localities, including Chicago, Alameda County, Somerville and Boston, as you mentioned, Karen. And also we're seeing cities in Europe, including Amsterdam, picking up on community wealth building, as well as places further afield, including Sydney in Australia. So this is an approach, a concept and approach where people are saying, hold on here, the economy is not working for us very well. It's not working for the planet. What can we practically do to think about how we start to rewire the economic system so it truly works for people, place, and planet? And so that's the interest, I suppose. And because we have a tried and tested model in practice, it means administrations can pick it up and start to run with it. They can run with it on Monday. You know, it doesn't need lots and lots of planning. You can get started on elements of the pillars that you mentioned at the outset there, Karen, straight away. And that's its beauty, if you like.
And I think, you know, Neil, you've mentioned also the different contexts in which this can be used. So you mentioned some of the places, some are big global cities, some are maybe a bit more rural, some have different economic and social strengths and challenges. Could you give maybe the participants here today a little bit of a framing on how this can be adapted in different kinds of contexts that, you know, basically anyone can try this at home, right? Is that the idea?
For sure. I mean, we know that, you know, wealth and flows of wealth and how wealth multiplies or doesn't is the defining feature of all economies. You know, who has it, where does it go, and how does it land in certain places? And clearly, community wealth building plays right into places that are struggling. You know, that was the initiatives in Cleveland and partly Preston. These are places that are struggling in terms of economic effervescence and buoyancy, and that was its, you know, starting point, if you like. But increasingly, there's a problem of wealth in affluent places, including, you know, Somerville in Boston, which is a fairly affluent place. But of course, the wealth is unevenly distributed. And so community wealth building looks to harness the wealth that places create. And how does it pre-distribute and redistribute that wealth more effectively for people? And also working within the context of a climate crisis and working within the limits of the environment. So what you have here is a mechanism, a concept and a practice, which is for all places. It's about how do we redirect wealth so that it's made virtuous and made planet nurturing and works for people and communities. So for instance, in Somerville, where they've taken up community wealth building, there you have amazing levels of economic buoyancy. You know, it borders Massachusetts Institute of Technology. There's new life sciences. There's economic growth there. But of course, they're worried about gentrification, displacement of people, key workers, affordability. All those things is what community wealth building can offer in terms of making that wealth work more effectively for that fairly affluent place.
Great. So just so that people are calling in from lots of different kind of communities. Great to hear that. Could you maybe give us a couple of the concrete examples or applications that you've seen with community wealth building? Because, you know, that those are all great concepts and everyone wants to help people, place, and planet. And we all want to do different kinds of activities, but we're operating in a big, you know, a big system, big economic global system. So what are kind of these local innovations, local examples that maybe you could share with people so they can get inspired to maybe try something and adopt some of these approaches back home?
Yeah, well, community wealth building is designed by those 5 pillars to actually apply it in a very easy, accessible way. So let's take the, you know, procurement, public spending pillar. There you have a desire by major institutions to make sure that when they purchase goods and services through the public spending, that truly lands in those places. It nurtures local businesses, it nurtures social enterprises, it nurtures co-ops. It makes sure that money that's spent has a sort of virtuous marker on it, so that we know that when the goods are serviced, good quality goods and services, but also you're thinking about fair work. You're thinking about how does it benefit local businesses. That's quite a practical application of how community wealth building works around that pillar. If you take the finance pillar as well, what you think about there is how do you create a financial architecture, a financial ecosystem that truly makes sure that wealth lands in that place and is virtuous. It's not extracted into the ether of the global economy. So this is about community investment vehicles, public banking, credit unions, a form of architecture that's more homey, that more relates to that place rather than something that's more detached and distant. So there's a number of practical things and a whole range of elements in policy and actions that sit across those 5 pillars. That means it can be applied individually across those pillars, but also as a whole suite of activities. And that's where you have the community wealth building action plans that Scotland has been advancing in a number of locations. And also you've got emerging action plans in places like Sydney, Chicago, Somerville, and so forth, that looks across all of those 5 pillars to put in place specific policy and practice actions accordingly.
Great. Well, let's take a couple of those examples. You mentioned for public procurement. Now, this is often highly regulated in different places. And I know that different initiatives are seeking to sometimes earmark some procurement towards particular social impact. So how does that mean concretely a place changes its public procurement approaches in order to achieve the kinds of goals that you were talking about? I mean, is it dedicating it to a social, those that are dedicated social enterprises? Is it expecting some sort of impact measurement as a result? What are the kinds of things typically that are done to help here?
Well, there's 2 things that's done around public procurement. Firstly, it's around the actual tender process to make sure there's great accessibility, that you get a wide range of organizations and entities that can potentially deliver those goods and services. So it's about not just going for the usual suspects. It's trying to make sure that as many organizations as possible are fit and equipped to bid for those particular contracts. And on the other side, in terms of supply, you're looking to develop a supply chain which it does embody, net zero, that does embody fair work, that is looking at local employment. So you're trying to develop the supply chain. This is economic development in action, if you like. It's like almost market making to make the market virtuous. And so in public procurement, you can have targets for particular types of aims, not just getting the goods and services, but having a range of local employment, that they're increasing net zero, reducing carbon footprint. All those can be indicators placed upon the public procurement process. And across many administrations, including Europe, UK, USA, there is a growing recognition of this social and ecological procurement and how we can flex both the process of putting out those tenders for those goods and services, but also developing a virtuous supply chain.
And I think also this comes up, I mean, we'll have a paper coming out also on some of these topics in particular related to the what we call here the social economy. And we can give more information also about OECD work on the social economy. It's actually received, it's been the subject of a recommendation here at the OECD. So at the highest levels, the OECD, they've said that the social and solidarity economy and social innovation is something that OECD governments should be thinking about how to cultivate and develop. And it's true on the public procurement side, some of the issues are training procurement officers to understand this. It might be breaking up some of the contracts into smaller sizes in order to make it more manageable for some of these entities that might not be the big multinationals. And so they might need more bite-sized types of contracts, and also a little bit more maybe long-term vision in terms of these kinds of contracting, because it can be very hard on some of these entities to have such major fluctuations. So spending was one of the pillars that we heard about. In terms of, for example, you mentioned the financial institutions, and you mentioned different types. And I know that also, I think in the Scottish model, there's a focus on different types of local anchors that can help and be supportive of community wealth building. Could you tell us maybe a little bit more about these kinds of local anchors that are part of the strategy? So some of it is financial institutions and those that maybe have a particular focus on the local economic development, or that are serving their credit union members, for example. But could you give us a little sense of who else can you work with in these community wealth building activities?
Yes, Karen. I mean, what's important to recognise is that there are certain types of organisations who are perhaps by their very nature more rooted in place. They are, your health institutions, your universities, your colleges, your local councils, perhaps a long-standing local business that has strong affinity to that place. Now, those in their very nature are more community wealth focused because they're servicing their inner locality and they're servicing the needs, wants, and desires of that locality, or their identity with that locality. So these anchor organizations, we call them, are partly inert. They're not as free floating as, say, other elements in the economy, say a global corporation, for instance. So that inertness, which is a positive, that inert nature means that we should be thinking about how we harness their power as economic players within place. And it could be, in some locations, these anchor organizations could be worth, 30, 40% of the whole economy of that locality. So how does a university function in that locality as an economic agent? Who does it buy goods and services from? What is its employment policies? What is its own investment financial strategies? How is it encouraging this virtuous aspect of how the economy functions? So they have a key role, and that is why Community Wealth Building places some of its effort on these anchor institutions. In Scotland, it includes the health board, it includes local authorities, university colleges, and so forth. And in Scotland, we also have something called community planning partnerships, which is a grouping of these anchor organisations that have already for a number of years been talking about place, talking about the economy. And so that is a good vehicle in Scotland to focus on these community planning partnerships, to imbue them with this idea that they can be community wealth builders and increase their economic role within place, their virtuous economic role in place.
Now, this is really interesting because it's sort of helping utilize what you have locally. And so it's a little bit of a culture shift in how we think about the power of these different local entities. So how do you bring them on board? Is it easy? Is it difficult? Are there challenges in getting them to maybe view their role differently, or are they, easy wins and you just have to give a little nudge and a strategy and it all works out?
Well, it varies, but of course, most of these organisations have an innate, if you like, a sense of civic responsibility, and you're tapping into that. You're tapping into the sense, if you are the University of Chicago or the University of Edinburgh, you have a civic responsibility. You're tapping into their responsibility, if you like, as an actor in place. So you play into that, but also, this is part of them also increasing their own worth as an organisation, their own corporate missions. Some of them have missions to improve the health of a locality, say a health board now, or a hospital. Now, community wealth building deals with the economic determinants of ill health. If people are poor, they're more likely to be ill. So, of course, for a hospital to see itself as an economic agent, not just an agent to improve health, means that they're helping their own issues in terms of dealing with ill health and demand on their services. And similarly, in education institutions, we know that, broadly speaking, that if you're poor and you're struggling, educational attainment is less likely to be, you'll have lower educational attainment. So again, the university or college seeing their role as an economic agent to improve the wealth of the population is actually a boon, a bonus to economic achievement as well, because people have more money in their pockets and feel more economically vibrant, and so thus more readily easy to learn. So there is this playing to people's hearts a civic duty in terms of these anchor institutions, but it's also, I think, community wealth building can actually help their own service and what they're seeking to achieve.
Karen, could I just come in here just for a moment?
Oh, sure, Liz, go right ahead. Sure.
Yeah, no, just kind of listening, obviously, really with real interest in what Neil has to say, but because I think that point that he was making there about, about who kind of what anchor organizations with different types of focus can really contribute to this agenda is really vital. I mean, at EDAS, what we've tried to do over the last few years in particular, particularly with our events around community wealth building, but more broadly as well, is actually open up conversations with people who wouldn't necessarily identify as being economic development, either specialists or practitioners or as working in that field, because in actual fact, many more people and many more organizations contribute to the development, growth and well-being of our economy than are just ones with economic development in their title or in their kind of, their strategy and plans. And I think we've achieved that when we ran a lot of the events with Neil over the last year around our community wealth building program for our members. It wasn't just our members, it was actually broader than that. We brought in people we brought in community, I think probably for the first time actually, UDAS had community reps, people who were really active locally as part of the conversation. And it made for really interesting and dynamic conversations as part of this. And that's what community wealth building, I think, is about. It is about bringing a whole array of different players and activists and, people who have something to contribute. Of course, the anchor organizations are vital because that's where, perhaps the wealth and the investment can come from. But actually, we need the totality of the community to be involved in making this happen. And I think that's been really interesting. And perhaps another thing I could also just say is maybe do a kind of slightly shameless plug, but we've got the kind of guide here, which just has been up on our website as of yesterday, and it is fantastic. Neil and others have been, incredible, bringing together and harnessing a huge amount of information that really, it's a very straightforward guide. It's what is it, about 40 pages long, but that includes a lot of information about resources and material that people can go to. But it has a huge array of examples of community wealth building in practice, not just in Scotland. There are many in Scotland, but it also draws from wider than that across other countries as well. And it also has a great deal of information really just around where to start with all of this. How do you put together a plan, the kind of nuts and bolts, the basic ideas about how you take this forward. So I think it's a really helpful addition to the information that's out there already, and I hope it'll be a kind of a go-to tool, if you like, for people who are really interested in this. And I think the audience here today, I would really encourage you to look at our website and to access this resource. So sorry, I'm being a bit shameful in plugging that, but it does have relevance for the conversation today and for the audience that are here.
No, thank you so much, Liz. And I think if we can just even put that link in the chat, because I think colleagues,
it's there already.
Great, thanks so much. Yeah, because I think it's really helpful for people to see the kind of practical guides on the how-to, because I think we are hearing a lot about the theory and then really this this practice. So I think we're having just a little trouble with the minister's technical connection. So in the meantime, I might just start with a couple of questions from the audience here, because some of them I think could apply to you all as well while we're waiting for the minister's technical issues to be resolved. But there's some questions here a little bit about community wealth building and how it's different from sort of the commons and the social economy more generally, and also some questions I see here about how do you sort of help ensure that you can protect communities and community wealth from extractive behaviors. So I see a few questions sort of on that front. So I think that's more maybe a little bit on the kind of theory behind community wealth building. And I think, Neil, it's helpful maybe to also put it in the context of some of the other theories and the different agendas internationally, how this kind of fits in. That would be really great. I think that could answer a couple of the questions we already have.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole family of progressive agendas, well-being economy, the commons, social economy, and so forth, and community wealth building stands alongside them as a partner, sister agenda. I would make the case though that community wealth building is fundamentally about economic system change, But it's not. It's doing it step by step, if you like, stealthily, if you like. It's not it's a bold and brave and progressive agenda, but it's got practical ways to achieve this. So in a sense, it's very practical. It's very, very focused on those 5 pillars and doing things and starting that journey to create the tipping point for wider economic system change. And in Scotland, we have a number of progressive agendas. And of course, through our national strategy for economic transformation, we've sought to join and create coordination and alignment across those progressive agendas. And indeed, that has been will be a key element of our legislation, proposed legislation moving forward, that we create alignment around our progressive agendas, particularly under the umbrella of wellbeing economy for Scotland, which is the signature overarching aim. In terms of the extractive behaviour of what happens in our economy, fundamentally, community wealth building is seeking to address extraction of wealth from place and seeking to make it generative and more circular, if you like. And in that, at the core of community wealth building is a desire to grow the social and solidarity economy, as you call it, Karen, but we would call it inclusive democratic enterprises, which includes co-ops, includes employee ownership, worker-owned firms, and so forth. These, by their very nature, are not extractive because the shareholders are the workers, or the shareholders are the people in that place. So in a sense, by their natural volition, they're not extractive. They don't have distant global shareholders. They relate to that place. So for community wealth building, the growth of those types of enterprises is key to resilience. It's key to ending or curbing extraction of wealth. And of course, it's key to giving everyone in that place a genuine stake in the economy. So the inclusive and democratic ownership pillar is preeminent important in terms of ending that wealth extraction. And we know if you have a genuine stake in the economy, it improves your well-being. You know, to have the sense of volition, to sense you have a stake in the economy, it broadly tells us that the evidence tells us that is good for our well-being and good for our well-being economy and good for our economic health.
Thank you so much, because I see a lot of questions coming in sort of on this issue on how to sort of redirect to avoid this and prevent this kind of extraction, if you will. I think there were a lot of other questions and hopefully the technical issues will be resolved, because there were a lot of very specific questions also on procurement that I think the minister would be really well placed to answer. I really want to pick up also on the point that Liz, you made about having people view themselves, these different actors in a local development situation, view themselves as economic developers that didn't see themselves before. I think with COVID, we realized how critical health is for all of these activities, for employers, for local development, et cetera, that this is not an individual health issue, it's a collective health, well-being, economic development issue. So I thought that was a really interesting point to raise. I wanted to ask a little bit more about the some of the different pillars. Do you have example? There was a question in the chat here about the finance pillar and financial institutions. So I know we talked a little bit about some of the local anchors that have a civic orientation, and then trying to explain how others have a really important role to play, so they see themselves in that role. How are you able to work with financial institutions, because some by definition, like a credit union, are there for their members, but other financial institutions maybe don't have that orientation, or maybe it's a country where they have certain laws that require community reinvestment, for example. So what are the kinds of things, if you have examples on that front, that would be great to share with colleagues.
I would say that the financial pillar and the operations of financial capitalism well, financial is one of the more difficult ones, I think, in terms of what one can do at a local or national level. But nevertheless, I think public banking, Scottish National Investment Bank, these types of financial institutions are starting to turn the dial on that peripatetic nature of finance and starting to land finance more within places and working more virtuously in places. So the Community Wealth Building seeks to advance those public banks and so forth. It's also worth noting, in terms of pension funds, particularly public sector pension funds, and how a number of pension funds are seeking to have a portion of their investment portfolios dedicated to local investment or to social type of impact. And I think you'd like to see a growth of those, and obviously Community Wealth Building supports that shifting behaviour of pension funds and the investments within it. It's interesting in Australia, in terms of their super funds. I think they have about over 20 trillion Australian dollars. It's one of the largest largest pension fund holdings in the world, and every Australian has a stake in those pension funds. And of course, that's an amazing democratic power of how those individual pension holders, how they can influence the behaviour of what those pension funds invest in. And from an Australian context, this is moving potentially from a property owning democracy to a financial owning democracy. So there's these sorts of different directions and patterns of how we change financial investment that is much more social and much more local and much more virtuous, I think is kind of key. And at the same time, you have all things like credit unions, you have community investment vehicles. These perhaps more traditional social type of investment vehicles, Community Wealth Building seeks to grow and amplify them. And indeed in Scotland, that is some of the areas have been working. There has been a augmentation and a greater support for the local forms of investment, including credit unions.
Great. I don't know, do Neil or Liz, do you have a specific example, or could you give a example of any, like a very targeted initiative, just to kind of walk through that with our participants here today? Because we've talked a lot about the sort of the big picture framing and the theory and what we're trying to sort of redirect wealth and rethink the role of different actors. If you have either of you a nice concrete example that could help people sort of see what the entity, how it was created, what role it's playing, and how it's contributing to community wealth building.
You mean specifically on the finance pillar, or more generally?
Any pillar, I think, yeah. Just to help people see concretely how it could be applied, give a little inspiration.
Yeah, I mean, if you take North Ayrshire in Scotland, what you have there is a range of actions that have taken place across the 5 pillars. You've seen a redirecting of anchor spending towards local firms, including local social enterprises. You've seen the development of organisations within the supply chain that are more local or more social or ecological in their outlook. They also have one of the first employee-owned hotels on the island of Arran, which again is like, that is a worker-owned hotel. You're seeing the municipality, North Ayrshire, look to develop solar farms using its own powers of spending and direction. So there's a range of things that are, in some senses, small, but growing in terms of trying to build community wealth in practice and place. I mean, we know from Preston in Lancashire, where we've seen the collective force of all the anchor organisations working collectively together, that's seen around £70 million returning back to the local Preston economy through change in procurement behaviour. And that included, and also £200 million brought back to the wider Lancashire economy by changing procurement tender process, but also animating local supply chains. So in the guide that Liz mentioned, there is a number of examples from Scotland, and on the Democracy Collaborative website, there is also a range of these practical examples, which all indicate the outcomes that are achieving for that place and for local people.
Thank you so much, Neil. I don't know if Liz, do you want to jump in on that one, or?
I think, to be honest with you, I would just refer people to the guide that we've just put together, because under every single pillar, all of the 5 pillars, there are several examples of specific pieces of activity. Whether, I mean, the North Ayrshire one is probably the one that's most obvious. It's been in many ways, it's been hailed as the great example of community wealth building that's been brought in Scotland. But there are so many others, across the country, the Western Isles and down in the south of Scotland. We've had pilot areas that have been going in the last few years. So the guide gives examples from each of those pilot areas as well as others. So I just think there's a wealth that people can draw upon depending on which pillar they're particularly interested in, or, as Neil says, for the area of North Ayrshire, they're looking at the totality of bringing the pillars into action.
Excellent. And I think you mentioned also, Neil, just a moment ago about the amount of money that was redirected via procurement, et cetera. So what are the kinds of indicators that are being used to measure the impact of community wealth building? Because, turning around, for example, a community that's maybe been struggling a bit in the global economic environment, what are the kinds of measures? Is it looking at resource flows in terms of cash? Is it looking at the well-being of people in the community? Is it measuring civic spirit? What are the kinds of things people are using?
Yeah, all of the above. I think what's quite exciting about in Scotland is that we have a well-being economy, developing well-being economy monitor, which has been piloted in an area called Clackmannanshire, and that is the whole suite of indicators that seeks to collectively measure the well-being of the nation and for individual and communities and for individual Scots. And it's got a range of different indicators you would use. And community wealth building is dovetailing, is linking in with that well-being monitor. And Scotland, I think, it recognises the issues of measuring a performance on GDP. We need to be much more skillful than that, and of course that's where the well-being monitor comes in, and we've got work to do on this, both specifically on measuring the impact of community wealth building, but how it fits in with the wider well-being aspirations. But certainly we're on that journey. I mean, geographical spending with SMEs, how many the economic health of individuals and families, that's important. How net zero, a whole range of things that touch upon the different pillars, seeking to kind of, what measures matters, doesn't it? And of course, at the end of the day, we need to have effective measurement and have that instilled within the jurisdiction administration, and that will change behavior, because that's what we're building performance on. And we, globally, all our nations, all our places have a problem when we're measuring performance purely on growth or GDP. That is clearly inadequate for the polycrisis we face. I was just going to add there, Karen, it's important to note that, in Scotland, our approach has been both singular in terms of in certain places and across the pillars, but also is universal. We've sought to build networks of people interested in community wealth building. We've sought to build practice in specific places, but also now look to change policy. And some of the outcomes we've achieved, we feel there's maybe some policy changes that are required and legislative changes are required to have greater and deeper outcomes. And that's where our proposed legislation comes in, to remove some of those inertias and barriers and to create a more less fighting against the policy legislative environment to achieve community wealth building outcomes, but make it more smoother. And that's what the proposed legislation will hopefully try to achieve.
Great. I think also just, and I guess there's still some technical problems, so apologize. It wasn't false advertising. He is, the minister is trying to get it. But a couple questions about places where you have very few local anchors. So, you know, we mentioned some of the places, you know, Somerville, you can't walk through without tripping over a Harvard graduate, for example, or, you know, and University of Chicago, I know well, I went there back in the 90s, and I know, you know, they're, you know, they're in a neighborhood that's not always, that's been struggling a little bit as well. So, but these are places where you have those assets. So when you go to a community where there just isn't that wealth of local anchor institutions, what are the kinds of entities you can turn to?
Well, you know, it's a really good question. I think in our action plan process, which a number of areas across the world, including Scotland, are taken forward, that seeks to, it's an inquiry into looking at the existing assets, the existing place, and what can be amplified or scaled up in community wealth building terms. Now, each place has some form of anchor, a community, you know, community centre, a local doctor's surgery. They have people, individuals and communities that will have their own personal assets and so forth. So it's wherever it is, we're trying to understand what is the wealth of this place, what assets are there, and no matter how small, how can we amplify and scale that up to make this generative sort of community wealth approach. So yeah, I wouldn't say it's easier to have large anchor institutions. It's just different. There's different forms of wealth and different forms of wealth extraction and different types of dynamics of the flow of wealth that one needs to look at. I mean, in some locality, in some community wealth building approaches, you're talking about perhaps quite small places that are taking up community wealth building, perhaps a neighborhood, and looking at its assets and how it can improve wealth for that place. So I think it's a question of not either or, it's a question of a different scale of approach to community wealth building. But the action plan process, which is a tried and tested methodology, is well versed in finding that out and to create prescriptions that allow all places to be on that community wealth building journey.
Thank you so much, Neil. I see a question here that I think is kind of interesting because I don't know if anyone has a clear answer on this, but the role of technology in our lives and how that can actually, facilitate, help, or make community wealth building more complicated. So it's a tricky one. So let me know if it's out of scope, but just thought I'd throw that out there because it did come up in the question panel, and it's one that I don't know has really been talked about quite as much.
Well, the one thing that particularly excites me about, there's many things to talk about, but particularly interested about digital is how do we overcome the atomization of a society and the atomization of individual actors? And through digital platforms, we can create the individual economic agent. Through digital platforms can actually reach a much bigger marketplace, if you like. So I do think there's something about platform co-ops in terms of individual retailers or individual economic actors and how they can be part of a bigger market through digital forms of communication, but also digital forms of community, if you like. So I think there's a huge potential in terms of that digital technology, if you like. I also think there's something around how do we ensure that our communities and the digital platforms that we all enjoy themselves are community wealth builders. We tend to use global platforms. Is there more municipal or community-owned platforms so that when we're using those platforms, they're actually the wealth that's accrued is again recirculated back for all of us to enjoy rather than being global shareholders. I mean, we have behemoths, don't we, in terms of the global platforms we use, and I think we'd much prefer a more distributed set of platforms, as well as a pre-distributive element, so that we all have a genuine ownership stake in them.
No, that's great. And I just encourage anyone who has examples of that, because the OECD is working on a couple of papers looking at the platform economy for local development, where there's really an opportunity to have a more realistic, a more targeted approach. And also, in a sense, there are some that are being created to also support employment issues more generally. So competitors for ride sharing services, for example, in New York City, because we have, some major platforms we know, like Uber, or for accommodations, Airbnb, but there's also a Fairbnb. There are, so I think that if there are examples you've seen in your communities, we'd love for you to share those in the chat, because we'd like to highlight those in future work here at the OECD. I think this technology question is really quite fascinating, and one that we need to help master a bit, because it's kind of underlining a lot of the different pillars, including, for example, crowdsource funding, which often uses platforms in order to sort of direct wealth locally. And so I think there's a lot of exciting work here. Now, I'm just getting word that that he wasn't able to connect, so I really apologize for those, and maybe we can figure out an alternative so you can hear directly from the minister's mouth some of the exciting things they've done in Scotland, and why they have chosen to take this path, and why it's part of, having it as an official title in a political position is really a world first to our understanding. So I think, at this point we've hit the hour, so we'll probably have to wrap up, unfortunately. But I don't know if Liz or Neil, you want to have any concluding remarks or say anything else about the sort of changes as a result of Scotland having really put this at the core of some of their economic and social development approach.
Do you want to go first, Neil? Because I have some kind of end thoughts, if you like. Yeah.
Yeah, I would just say to everyone that, keep your eye on Scotland and what we're doing. I mean, we're on a journey. We're seeking to, turn the dial, build a different type of economy for Scotland and our people. And we need our help. We need your help too. And so examples that you see will fit within the pillars, and we're constantly wanting to learn and make this truly build a well-being economy of Scotland. So thanks very much today, and keep your eye on Scotland, and any thoughts you do have, please fire it our way, and we'll no doubt help us on this journey. So thank you very much today. Thank you.
Yeah, and can I just, so first of all, thank you, Karen, for the conversation that we have managed to hold today, and Neil for really ably, but as an expert in community wealth building, I don't feel as though the audience have lost out in any way to in terms of the content, because I think a lot of what Neil has said would have been what the minister would have said. It's just really unfortunate we seem to have had, it's not just us, I think the whole parliament is having online issues from what we can gather today. So but what I would say, you can still hear what the minister has to say, because, as I said, the podcast has just been released, and that's actually a conversation between Neil as interviewer, if you like, and the minister, talking about community wealth building and how it is evolving in Scotland. So I would actually ask everybody here to go to the EDAS website. It's now posted there, and you'll be able to hear directly from the minister. I think probably a lot of what would have been covered in today's conversation. So can I ask everybody to do that? And apart from that, I just want to say it's been a real pleasure to kick this off. I think that it would be if we will, what I think is this is the start of a conversation. This will not be the last time, I'm sure, that we talk about with LEAD community wealth building. As it evolves, as it takes shape, as the legislation comes in Scotland, there will be more happening here, and we would be delighted to work with you and with our colleagues Neil and others in bringing learning to the wide audience that LEAD and the OECD reach beyond our Scottish borders. So look forward to further conversations with you on this, and I believe other themes as well. I think our next one we're going to look at is perhaps green skills, Karen, as I understand it, in a month or so's time. So look forward to that. Okay. And thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you again so much, Nia, Liz, to all of those who joined and for your questions and comments. And we'll take that on board as well as we look at different OECD work, because I think some of the questions and comments are about also how to take this forward. And so we'll look at different opportunities if there's a critical mass of other actors who want to either peer share and get together and learn from each other, or do more projects that even we could do with the OECD. We'd be pleased to look into this. It's an exciting topic, and really excited to also hear about how Scotland has really implemented this on a broad scale. So thanks again to both of you, and to all of those who participate, and look forward to sharing with you upcoming forum webinars on issues like our new report on green skills coming out, but also we have a big event on March 20th and 21st that I should flag on the social economy, looking at its role as a source of innovation and inspiration and inclusion, how the social economy can help shape our future. So if colleagues can just throw that in the chat as well so everyone can see, but that's another opportunity to hit on some of the themes that are linked with community wealth building, because a lot of these entities are coming from the social economy sector. So thanks again to all, and look forward to a future conversation. Have a good day.